Hello everyone and welcome to this webinar today. My name is Lucy Moore and I'm a Professional Education Manager at ACCA. Our session today is designed to support your preparation for the Strategic Business Leader or SBL exam, whether you're taking that exam by paper or CBE, and I'm really pleased to be joined by an expert tutor, Sean Purcell. So let's have a look at the agenda for today's webinar. After he's introduced himself, Sean will be kicking off the session by talking a little bit about the new format examiner's report and also giving you some tips on how to tackle SBL. He's then going to move on to look at in detail at task 1 from the September-December 2020 exam, showing you how to plan your answer effectively and then write it up. And this demo also starts with some general advice on what to do at the beginning of an SBL exam when you might be feeling a bit overwhelmed. So, for example, how to approach your reading of the exhibits. We plan to have some time at the end to take your questions. We have some colleagues working behind the scenes to answer as many questions as they can. Please note, we're not going to be able to guarantee responding to everybody directly, either verbally or via the web chat, but we will have time at the end to share some questions, and hopefully those questions we do share will be helpful to everybody. So if you'd like to submit a question, then you just need to use the Q&A button. I'm now delighted to hand over to Sean for the rest of today's session. Sean, over to you.
Thank you, Lucy, and hello everyone, and welcome to this webinar, which we've designed to hopefully make SBL easier to pass when you sit the exam. As Lucy has said in the introduction, we're going to begin a little bit about my background, and I'll tell you why maybe the ACCA have asked me to deliver this webinar on their behalf. And then we're going to have a look at a past examination question, and we're, with the mindset of what's said in the most recent examiner's report. I'm not sure how familiar you are with the examiner's reports, but please, if you're not, have a look. It's been upgraded, updated, and it's absolutely fantastic. When we look at past questions, what I'm going to do, I'm going to look at the September-December exam. I'll begin with show you a few little tricks on what you can do to make the best use of your time and the best use of your reading. So hopefully that'll be really useful. And then we're going to have a look at how we put a question down on the CBE platform. Obviously, some of you might be doing this as a paper-based exam, and we will explain some of that also. But as a lot of us are doing CBE, I'll be demonstrating it through the CBE platform. And then we'll look at the second question on 1B, where it deals with some numbers. And numbers is an area, if you read some of the past examiners' reports, where students don't necessarily do themselves as much sort of justice as they could when answering a question. So that's what we're here to do. In terms of my background and who am I, if you want to know a little bit about that, well, my background is someone who qualified in industry. So I didn't qualify in practice, I qualified in industry. And when I first started work, I worked in manufacturing and financial services for some of Britain's biggest PLCs. I then kind of stumbled into the world of training by chance, and in the 90s and in the noughties, I was involved in a few accounting training startup businesses, one of which is now Kaplan today. And I've probably been doing that for over 25 years. And also during that time have been asked to represent the ACCA as their expert tutor for most of that time. And basically what that means is I help the ACCA with both students and tutors to enable people to have more success in their ACCA exams. And in fact, 2 years before the ACCA exam was launched in 2018, I was working with the ACCA from 2016 onwards in developing a rollout of how to teach SBL to tutors around the world. Yeah, so I've been involved with SBL 2 years before you've even seen the exam. Also, I have another hat which I wear, and I work as a consultant with finance teams around the world, focusing on finance business partnering competencies. And I've written much of the CPD on this, not just for ACCA, but for other professional bodies as well. And it's interesting that much of what SBL exam is trying to get you to understand is pretty much what I say to these people. So SBL, I think, is a fantastic resource to prepare finance staff for the future world of finance, because that future world is going to be quite different. Automation is going to play a much bigger role, and the skills that we need are very much reflective of the skills that SBL is trying to encourage you to practice, particularly those professional skills marks. So yeah, the ACCA have done a great job in introducing SBL. So that's a little bit about me. Hopefully that gives you some confidence in what I'm saying. What I want to have a talk about next is the examiner's report. Now, here we go. I have this by my bed. Read it regularly, the ACCA examiner's report. And as I say, if you're not familiar with it, give it a read. Yep. In my opinion, and I think many people's opinion, it's written in a much more user-friendly way than maybe previous examiner reports. And if you're not familiar with it, definitely make sure you go online and have a look at what it says. In terms of what it does, well, it gives you pretty detailed guidance on students' behavior in the exam, and it breaks the exam down into each subsection. So not just a broad brush, 1A, part 1, students did this well, they didn't do this very well. And it does that for every single question. So broken down, every single question in a kind of sequential way. Fantastic resource, which is all available for you on the ACCA website. So please engage with it. And I think what also is really good, it gives quite specific stuff with regards to students who did this were particularly well rewarded. However, students who just did this, well, they didn't really get any credit for that at all. And it was evident that students weren't very good at this. And yeah, you should really digest and absorb all of that stuff, because, the examining team will obviously have discussions with regards to what SBL candidates could do better on. And if they're not performing in areas very well, you can guarantee that those areas are going to be questioned time and time again until students become better at those particular issues. Yeah, so really important. It's a resource, I think, which not enough people access. And I've certainly, as someone who's involved with tutoring SBL students, I'm all over it and could, read it inside out and back to front. Yep. So in terms of where you're going to get this, well, you can download it from the ACCA website. The upgraded report has just happened from December 20, but when you go on the website, what you'll see lots of previous reports from exams prior to December 20, and although they're not quite the same as the new format report, they're still really, really useful, and I'd really encourage you to look at them. But from this day going forward, the examiner report is very much going to reflect how it looks in December 20. So please take it from me, it's really useful. So in terms of someone who's probably read every single examiner report on SBL, and I've read every report going back on P1 and P3, which is from where SBL has its origins, I want to kind of talk to you about the key things from all my knowledge of reading reports every exam session, what tends to be said about SBL candidates and on what they need to do better. And, I'll give you a summation, but I'd really encourage you to go and, confirm this for yourself. And I'm going to try to bring some of these points through into an answer review, which we're going to do in a moment. But in terms of SBL questions, the first thing that students really let themselves down on is in the area of time management. You know, as you know, SBL, big long exam, 12+ pages, and you've got to be so strict on your time. And you've got to realize when you are veering off the time. And the only way to understand about not doing things to time is to practice exams to time. And you need to do that on the ACCA CBE platform, not Word, not Excel, on the ACCA CBE platform. And I prepared an answer for you on that today. Obviously, if you're doing a paper-based exam, you're going to prepare that on a piece of paper to time also. There's lots written elsewhere on the ACCA website about time management, and you need to, decide what's appropriate for you. But if we say 40 minutes reading and planning, and we've got a 4-hour exam, that leaves us with 200 minutes left to acquire 80 marks, because remember, 20 professional skills marks require no time, and that comes to about 2.5 minutes a mark. So I treat the exam like a project management exercise in mark acquisition. If there's 4 marks, as you'll see on one of the questions, that's 2 minutes a mark, 4 times 2.5, 10 minutes. Start, finish, leave. Yep. So time management is crucial. People tell you this, the only way you realize how poor your time management is when you start doing things to time. What else? Mark focus. People seem to write answers which are fantastic, but sometimes far too short or far too long. You need to get into a mindset where you deliver an appropriately tailored answer to reflect the marks that are available. Yep, so sometimes I see there's 10 marks and someone writes half a page, there's 4 marks, and the same candidate will write 3 pages. Doesn't make sense. So your answers need to reflect the marks that are awarded. You only need to be aiming for 50% or more, remember that, and your answer structure should be accordingly delivered. And the layout, again, is a really important area. You've got to get the marker to love you. And to get the marker to love you, you've got to communicate to them in a way that helps them give you marks. It really is as simple as that. Markers are on your side. They want you to pass. But if you talk to them in a strange, complicated, messed up language, they're going to struggle to give you marks. So really make sure that you think about your layout. You think about your mark focus. And professional skills marks are something that I would be reviewing in my plan, and I'm actually looking through the answer. The professional skills marks are the lens through which I interpret the question. So if it's asking me about commercial acumen, I make sure the tone of my answer is one reflecting a mind of being commercially aware. If it's asking about skepticism, I'm not taking everything at face value, and in my mind I'm challenging and thinking about what's being said. So professional skills marks, really important. The other thing I'm actually going to demonstrate to you, so we'll talk more about this when we do an actual answer, is using numbers in SBL. The way in which we deal with numbers in SBL is very different to the way in which you deal with numbers in previous subjects and subjects on the strategic professional level and at the applied skills stage. And what I mean by this is when we get to strategic business leader exam, we've passed our PM exam and our FM exam, and we've demonstrated, yeah, we can do the sums. So, you are not going to get any marks for doing sums on SBL. Of course, we need to do sums, but where the marks are going to be awarded for are when we actually, look at the, do the sum and talk about the consequence or the impact or the relevance of that figure. Yeah, you're not going to get marks for the calculations because you've done that already. So numbers, it's really important when doing numbers questions that we do the number by all means, but that's not how we're going to gain most marks. We're going to get marks by inferring what that number means to us and whether it's suspicious or it's positive or it's going to limit us borrowing or something of that nature. Yep, so that's really important. And then the other thing that people are sometimes a little scared of on SBL questions is they think all of the answers are in the official publishing textbooks, which they're not. you on Strategic Business Leader are asked to act in the way one would act in the workplace. So you are given, permission to think when answering questions what you would do in the workplace. Certainly some of the technical knowledge which the syllabus covers is a great catalyst to help us think in the right way, but it's perfectly okay for you to look at a question and maybe relate that to a real life business. Say it was for fast food joint. Well, how do things work in McDonald's? And so on. And just you're perfectly within your rights to use that for inspiration. So a little bit of lateral thinking is something I'd really like you to do. So what we're going to do now is we're going to look at the December 2020 past exam. You can have a look at this from the ACCA website if you haven't already downloaded it. And what I've done to speed things up, because doing my answers live is obviously going to limit how much I can do. So I've recorded this for you. And whilst we are reviewing the recording, if you have any questions, I'm going to be reviewing your questions. I can't promise I will answer all of them during the video, but any good questions and ones which are repeated a number of times will hopefully be able to answer in the Q&A session at the end. So your screen is going to slightly change, and we're going to look at an overview of a December 2020 question 1. You might want to have printed that off already and have a look at it, and I'm going to show you how we're going to answer that. So I'm going to talk to you. This is probably going to take about 45-50 minutes for us to go through all of the past way to deal with a question, how to answer a question, and how to answer a question with numbers. And during that time, I'll be browsing questions. But my hope is that you're going to focus on the video, you're going to take on board what I say, and then you're going to do that in your exam, because if that's what you do, you're definitely going to pass the SBL exam. So let's have a look at the video. Okay, so I'm on the ACCA CBE platform here, and I have assigned myself December 20, and I just want to go through what would I do if I was faced with an exam like you're going to face in June, and how do I deal with everything? What do I start with first? People can sometimes be a little overwhelmed with all the information that is available, and my advice would be keep it very simple, really, and start at the beginning. So the beginning is an overview. So here we've got an overview of the organization. I've just highlighted one or two things in this exhibit, and what we can see here, just the highlight function is there, but just to speed things up, I've highlighted we have an organization called Bloom Conservation, which is a not-for-profit charitable business. It was set up by a lady called Dana Bloom. She was an entrepreneur with a passion for wildlife. She set this wildlife park up in the country of Zealand, and since it was founded, it's provided a lot of management of some of the world's most endangered and threatened animals. She has also then gone on further and run programs which protect animals around the world in their natural habitats in 15 countries. To do that, they employ both local experts and volunteers. So then in the second paragraph, it says much of BCO's income comes from donations, as you would expect in a charity. It then goes on to say that Zealand, the country in which the wildlife park exists, has been suffering from economic recession for several years, and quite a lot of charitable organisations in the country have actually struggled. BCO has managed to survive by cost-cutting and rationalising things, but obviously it's not easy to be raising money in such economic times. And then the third part of the overview says BCO has a board of trustees, and that's great. Obviously there's going to be some kind of reference, I suspect, to corporate governance. So yep, we're going to see something there, but yeah, and then it talks right at the end that they've got a new chairperson, Rani Jaffels, who has a strong commercial background having been chief executive at several leading corporations in G-Land. So that's the introduction. So what am I going to do next? Should I read the other exhibits? Well, I'm actually not going to read the other exhibits because without context, the information which is included in them doesn't really mean much. So to contextualize the exhibits, what I would then do, having read the overview, is look at each of the tasks and make a mental note of what those tasks are and then try to connect those tasks to each of the exhibits. So let's have a look at task 1. What's it about? Just a general overview of what it's talking about. Here we see task 1 is asking us to do a briefing note for the CFO, which talks about agency relationships for a charity. It then talks about a 2-tier board, which there was no mention in the overview, so I assume there's probably an exhibit about that. And then how the mission and strategic objectives meet its key stakeholder needs. So again, I'm probably going to be looking for an exhibit talking about mission and strategic objectives. So that's fine. Part B asks about financial and non-financial performance in the last financial year, giving reasons and implications of the results. Okay, so I'll be looking for some kind of reporting information. So first bit, corporate governance-y, second bit, finance, non-financial. That's fine. Here's task 2, and I've highlighted a couple of things here, and it says in a recent report BCO sets out 3 strategic objectives for the next 5 years, and the external environment is going to impact on these objectives, and therefore for 15 marks we've asked to prepare a report which evaluates the extent to which external environment could impact on strategic objectives. Okay. Part B asks us to prepare 3 slides with notes. So when slide questions come up, most of the marks are going to be awarded for the notes. There's 15 marks here. There's 3 slides, 5 marks a slide. I would say probably 1 mark for the slide and 4 marks for a good set of notes. So probably 4 nice sentences to represent a note. That's how I'm thinking. Okay, so that's talking about IT, and it's talking about the external environment, so let's think about that. Task 3 asks us, I'm just going to close task 2. Task 3 asks us to prepare a report which evaluates the current risk register. So again, I will need to link task 3 to a specific exhibit, and the adequacy of the risk mitigating activities. 15 marks. Okay, that's fine. I'm then going to look at task 4. Task 4 for 10 marks asks us to look at the importance of the board of trust, the importance for the board to have a sufficient mix of skills and diversity, and the importance of continuing professional development for the board members. Okay, so diverse boards and CPD. Okay, so I've got those clear. What I'm now going to do is I'm going to look at each of these exhibits. So let me just close these tasks down and look at each of the exhibits. So the first exhibit is an extract from the annual report, and it talks about the mission, it talks about the vision and aim. So what I would now do is I'm going to make a little bit of a note in the word processing area which exhibit relates to which task. So I've titled it up plan here, just so it's clear to the marker that this isn't an answer. So for each of these tasks, I'm going to say for task 1, I think exhibit 2 on extracts from the annual report is going to be quite useful. Let's have a look at exhibit 3. Could there be anything else? I think exhibit 2 is going to help with 1B and also with 1A part 3. Exhibit 3 gives us a overview of the leadership, and there was a little bit of corporate governance, if you recall, in the first part of task 1. So again, I'm going to go back to my word processing, and I'm going to say that I'm also going to have a little look at exhibit 3 for task 1 to help me put together an answer. Okay, so just a makeup of the board. I think also there may be a potential here for task 4. If you remember task 4, it talked about the skills mix of the board. Maybe we could bring something about these board members as an example of inappropriateness. So I'm going back to my word processor, and I'm also just going to make a little note that for task 4, I'm also going to maybe have a little referral to exhibit 3. Let's have a look at exhibit 4. Exhibit 4 is giving us some numbers. We go from the top. It gives the income, it gives the expenditure, it gives quite a few KPIs there, which we'll be able to comment on. We can see how they've dropped or gone up year to year. We'll be able to actually give some context of whether the figures are attractive or not. I would say that is going to be very useful for the second part of task 1, which was talking about financial and non-financial. So we're going to also say on task 1 that we're going to look at exhibit 4. That's going to be useful for us. If I then have a look at exhibit 5, what is happening here? This is talking about what's going on in the world. It's talking about how charities must change. I think where this is kind of maybe making me think it might be relevant, I think if you remember task 2 was talking about IT, wasn't it? I think this is task 2, and task 2 was talking about the external environment. So I think there's potentially something in this exhibit 5 which is going to help us with task 2. So on task 2, I'm going to say exhibit 5 is definitely worth a look. Let's move on to exhibit 6. Expand this out so we can see it a bit more. So exhibit 6 is basically showing us a risk register, and there was a very specific question on risk and the risk mitigating activities. So this was task 3, and so task 3 I'm going to look at exhibit 6. It gives lots of information. And then the final thing is talking about charity leadership. It's talking about what's been going on, how charities need to kind of improve. So I would say that in that one, I think there's definitely some potential to talk about the external environment. So I think if I go back to word processor, if I was to mention, where are we? Task 2, I think I might bring a little bit on exhibit 7. But I think there was also a question which was asking us about IT. So I suppose, yeah, we could maybe, it gives us just about the fact that, you know, how IT could improve things. So yeah, maybe also that's task 2, isn't it? Exhibit 7. So what I have here, I've got a little plan of the exhibits. Having digested and read each exhibit, I now have linked them to each task. And rather than me having to read all 7 exhibits again to try to make sense of them, in the little exercise I've just spent a few minutes doing now, there is clarity to me between which exhibit is most linked to which task, and that's going to save me time in the exam. So that's a top tip to save you a little bit of time. What I want to do now is I want to have a go at looking at a question and how would I put together an answer. So let's have a go at that. So the question that I want to have a look at is task 1A. Let's have a look at task 1A. What I'm going to do to help me make sure I don't miss anything out is I'm going to copy these into my word processing area. So I've titled up answer plan, and I'm literally just going to copy that down. So what I'm seeing is 12 marks. I've got 3 parts. So I think the rough approximation of each of these would be, I'm going for a 4, I'm going for a 4, and I'm going for a 4. And I need to manage my time accordingly. As I said earlier, it's absolutely critical that we manage our time. So if we think the exercise we conducted to begin with, where we allocated each exhibit to the tasks and we read and we understood, it's going to take us approximately 40 minutes. It's a 4-hour exam, 240 minutes, take 40 off, we've got 200 minutes. And we have to get 80 marks. Remember, the professional skills marks take no time to get. So 200 divided by 80 gives me 2.5 minutes per mark. So I'm therefore going to, on each of these, going to be spending 10 minutes. I'm going to be spending 10 minutes, and I'm going to be spending 10 minutes. Yep, that's how much time I've got. And I actually, in my answer, would probably, when I'm going to write answer, I'm going to do this, start, and whatever the time I'm starting it is, and whatever the time I need to finish it is, I'm going to do that on every answer. Obviously, if you take longer reading and planning, you need to adjust your timings accordingly. So looking at this question, we've got 3 parts. I'm going to concentrate on the first part to begin with, but my answer is going to be coloured by the professional skills marks requirement, which are awarded for commercial acumen in demonstrating understanding of the organisational issues relevant to BCO. So BCO is a charity, and obviously the commercial acumen issues with regards to a charity. So let's have a look at A Part 1. And A Part 1 says the specific nature of the principal-agency relationships of the BCO as a charitable organisation. So what am I going to do here? Well, when I think about agency relationships, in a traditional corporate world, we have the principal, who is the shareholder, and we have the agent, who is the directors who are appointed by the principal to act on their behalf. But here we have a charity. So I think I need to get 4 marks. I think I will begin my answer with an explanation of what a principal-agent relationship is. I think I'm then, so get a mark for that. I will then talk about who the principal is in this context. I'll talk about and what they're there to do, and maybe I'll talk about the agent and what they're to do. So there's 3 marks. Maybe I can craft another mark talking specifically about a charity. Yeah, so that's my plan. So going here, I'm going to start with 1A1. I'm going to talk about the relationship. So we're talking about, so we're going to talk about the principal stroke agency relationship. I'm going to talk about principal in BCO. I'm going to talk about the agent in BCO, and I'm going to talk about relationship between them. So for each of those, I would maybe aim for a mark. We are aiming for a total of 4 marks, although we don't need to get 4 marks. We need to, 2 or 3 would be more than we need. Let's now take my plan, and what I would do with my plan, I've done a kind of brainstorm. That's enough. That's 4 marks. I focused on the marks. I'm just going to check, is that what the question says? The specific nature of the principal-agent relationship of the BCO as a charitable organisation. Does my plan deal with that? Yep. Okay. I'm going to take my plan and I'm going to turn each of them into a little bullet point. And what I'm going to say below each one is an articulated sentence explaining the principal-agency relationship. So what I'm going to say about principal-agency relationships is that a principal, maybe put a slash there, a principal-agency relationship is one where the principal devolves responsibility to carry out the tasks needed to operate a well-governed charity to their agents, and the agents are expected to carry out these tasks in the best interests of the principal. So I'll get a mark for that. In the context of the charity, BCO, who is the principal? So in terms of the principal, in the context of BCO, I'd say the Board of Trustees acts as the principal. If you make a spelling mistake, there is no negative marking, so don't worry about that. And I talk about their responsibility is that BCO has good governance. Their responsibility is to act in the interest of all stakeholders, and that includes donors to the charity, but also volunteers and animal experts. And then the agent in BCO, I would suggest here, is the management board. And they've been given that responsibility by the principal, who's the Board of Trustees, and those agents must carry out their tasks to the best of their ability and perform to the standards that the board expects of them. So I think we're going to get 3 marks for that. Let me finish off with what the relationship is. So I think I'd finish this by saying the relationship between the board and the trustee is often described as a fiduciary one, fiduciary. Again, no penalties for spelling mistakes. This means that the management board carry out their tasks on behalf of the board in exchange for a reward in terms of a salary for their services, and must behave in the best interests of the trustee board. So what have I done there? Well, I've got equal weight to my answer. There's 4 marks. I've done a subheading. That is really easy for the marker to follow. There's 4 points, there's 4 marks, and that's a great answer. As I've written a start and finish time, I check my watch, and I then move on to the next requirement, which asks us to talk about the advantages for BCO of having a 2-tier board structure. And I think reading this question, there's probably more opportunity than maybe in the first one to demonstrate a little bit of commercial acumen. We did kind of bring commercial acumen into this a little by saying, you know, acting in the best interests of the stakeholders, but there's probably more scope in part 2. So let's have a look at part 2. So let's now have a look at part 2, where we're asked to look at the advantages for the BCO of having a 2-tier board structure. Again, it's 4 marks, 2.5 minutes a mark if we're using that time management approach would give us 10 minutes. So in the same way, I'm going to write my start and I'm going to write my finish time. So it's asking about 2-tier boards, which again is testing some of our corporate governance knowledge. If I was to do a quick brainstorm on why 2-tier boards are a good idea, I think I'd say the following. 2-tier boards will give you clear segregation of duties. A 2-tier board structure will also facilitate much wider stakeholder involvement. It's also going to give the supervisory board direct power over management. What else? Well, maybe I'm struggling to come up with another point here. And if that's the case, well, I've got 3. We need to get 4 marks. So I have got 75% of my answer to this question. So for now, I'm quite happy. So I'm now going to take each of these points and I'm going to expand them like I did before into subheadings. And under each heading, I'm going to give an articulated, explained sentence or 2. So the first point I'd say is that a 2-tier board provides clear segregation between those that manage the company and those that control it for the benefits of the wider BCO stakeholders. I'm then going to talk about wider stakeholder involvement. Underline that, make it bold. And I'm going to say a charity such as BCO has a wide range of stakeholders, and by arranging a two-tier board structure, it will facilitate the ability to add representatives from a wider range of stakeholders. And that's not going to be possible if there was just a unitary board. So that would be a benefit. And then my final point, again, just taking my brainstormed bullet points and making them an underlined subheading. Having a two-tier board will give the trustee board direct power over management. So there's my answer to A part 2. I didn't get all 4 points, but I got 75%, so I'm happy with that. Let's now move on to task A part 3. And again, 4 marks, 10 minutes. How does the BCO's mission and strategic objectives meet its stakeholder needs? Well, what I'm going to have to do here is, first of all, go back to Exhibit 2. I can see the mission is to protect and conserve our wildlife for future generations. So that the question is asking us, how does the mission link with stakeholder needs? I think maybe explain what the mission is and talk about the stakeholders would be wildlife, including as one of the stakeholders, so that's definitely in line. It then says, how does the objectives work? We can see here we've got a first objective, ensuring that 100 threatened species are protected and returned to their natural habitat. Well, again, I would argue that a stakeholder would be of BCO would be these threatened species, as would be the communities where these species come from. So that's going to be in line. So there's another point. Second objective point says invest in 100 wildlife habitat projects across the world. Provide training and education for local staff, volunteer and communities. Well, again, you could argue that a key stakeholder of BCO would be wildlife habitats, would be volunteers, would be local staff and communities who with better education could help make a better world for wildlife. So again, I think that's in line. So there's 3 out of 4. And if I said the third objective, ensure 1 million people are better connected with nature through education and awareness, well, if I did that, that is going to again be congruent with the needs of the broader stakeholders of BCO. So talk about the mission for a mark, talk about each objectives for a mark each, and that will get me 4. So what am I going to do? I'm going to now just close this Exhibit 2, and I'm going to start with mission of BCO. I'll give an introduction. A mission is a general statement of the reasons why businesses exist. Let me just correct that, exists. And it states that the mission in preserving and conserving wildlife for future generations, the stakeholders of BCO will be donors, volunteers, and the wildlife themselves, which will all be beneficiaries of the mission's stated aim. So that would be a mark for that. I'm then going to look at each of the objectives. So let's talk about each objective. So objective 1 would be ensuring that the 100 threatened species are protected and returned to the environment or their habitat. And this objective protects threatened wildlife and the habitats where they come from, therefore very much in line with stakeholder needs. If we then look at objective 2, Objective 2 is invest in 100 wildlife habitats across the world. Well, by pursuing that objective, staff of BCO, volunteers and local wildlife communities, they're all going to benefit from this objective being achieved, and thus stakeholder needs will be satisfied here also. And then if we have a look at Objective 3, ensure 1 million people are better connected with nature through education. Well, if the wider population are more educated on wildlife issues, the natural world in which they live is going to be a safer place for them to live. And again, this is going to benefit the stakeholders of BCO. So maybe if we just gave an extra little underline and a bold of each of the bold. just to make it easy for the marker. Always make the marker's job as easy as you can. Then they're going to easily be able to tick and award you a mark for each of those points. So by presenting it in the way we presented it, please take note of that. We've given an explanatory sentence. We've highlighted what we're going to say with a subheading. Just the layout of that, you will agree, is really useful for the markers to follow. And we've got 11 out of 12 points, which is way more than we need to pass. So fantastic, well done. The other thing that we did well there was we focused on the requirements given in each of the tasks. And if you refer to the examiner's report, you will see that those students who were weak in answering this question just gave generic explanations on agency relationships, didn't really focus on advantages of two-tier board structures, just general governance issues, and they didn't really consider how stakeholders' needs were being met when they were talking about the mission and objective. So important that we follow the requirements carefully to maximize our marks. Let's now have a look at task 1B. So to remind you, we are asked here to analyse the financial and non-financial performance of BCO in the latest financial year 20X1. So very clear there, providing reasons for and implications of the results. That's a really important thing for you to acknowledge on an SBL paper, because many examiner reports talk about how students simply just give the calculations and don't really show any reason for or implications of them. And unfortunately, if you read the examiner report, this was the same in this exam. Yep, and it basically said that many candidates presented a wide range of correct percentage change calculations for a lot of the information, but in many cases it went little further than this. Yep, and the examiner report says quite clearly the question requirement clearly asked for analysis plus reasons for and implications of results. And if you just stated the numbers, you would not get any marks, because the examiner describes answers which just do a few percentages to be observational rather than analytical, and you will not gain any credit. So really, really important that when you're doing questions of this nature in your exam, you must not only present a correct calculation, but you also must evaluate whether this is a positive, a negative, it's significant, it's concerning, and so on. Have you considered why it might have happened? Have you linked it to something else? And also, have you called out the potential consequence of the rise or the fall? So let's have a look then. What I would do, as I did with 1A, I would copy and paste the requirements into the word processing area. And I'm also aware that we're going to get professional skills marks for analysis skills in considering the relevant information and evidence relating to BCO's financial and non-financial performance. So essentially, are we trying to explain with the evidence we're given why some of the figures may show the results that they do? So in the word processing area, to save time, I've copied this in. I've copied in a plan for 1B, and I've thought about it, 13 marks. I would then have thought, well, 13 marks, if I'm using 40 minutes for reading and planning, obviously if you're taking a little longer, you need to adjust your per minute mark. But if we assume 40 minutes, so we've got 13 marks. If we look at 2.5 times 13, it comes out at about 32.5 minutes. So when I would be answering in the exam, again, just to stress, I'm going to do start and I'm going to do finish. Looking at the questions, it talks about financial and non-financial. Well, the information that we're going to use for this is going to be in Exhibit 4, and this is all given in Exhibit 4. And I can see from Exhibit 4 that really I probably have quite a lot more information regarding financial information as opposed to non-financial. So I'm not thinking that this question is 50% financial and 50% non-financial, but I definitely need to acknowledge the non-financial aspects. When dealing with a question of this nature, where you are given all that activity information that you are given in the Exhibit 4, is you simply copy and paste and do some calculations. So again, I prepared this earlier, but it took me literally a couple of minutes. I copy and pasted the information which went into column B, C and D, and then I literally worked out the percentage change between what happened in 20x1 over what happened in 20x0, and you can see my sum there, and I literally copied all that down and made it a percentage, and I got this information in literally less than a minute. So use the spreadsheet functionality. But the other thing important, I titled it up here, if you see Appendix 1, Question 1b. So you do your calculations in the spreadsheet area, but you do your mark acquiring answer in the word processing area. So if I just look at what I said, start and finish, financial performance evaluation, I said the calculations to which these comments refer to can be sourced in the spreadsheet section, Appendix 1. So just in case I maybe got a calculation wrong and we can apply the own figure rule, that would be how you do it. But the point I would suggest is you make your answer where you want to show to the marker your understanding in the word processing area. So what do I have here? I've broken down financial performance evaluation, and I've used subheadings and white space. And don't forget, what I'm trying to do with my answer is on each separate answer I give, I'm trying to, consider why it's happened, evaluate whether it's a positive, it's negative, it's significant, it's concerning. And I was thinking, so the so what on each bit. So the first thing I make a subheading for is income from wildlife park admissions. And if we look at our spreadsheet area, we can see that this income went up by 3.3%. Now, if you just said income went up 3.3%, that wouldn't be enough. Yeah, you wouldn't get any marks for that at all. But if we investigated a little bit further, income went up. But if you look further down, visitor numbers actually went down. So how come income went up and visitor numbers went down? Did they put the prices up? Did they have a different ticketing pricing structure? I'm not sure. But I'm going to make some comment on that. The income rose to 3,103 from 3,005K in 20XO, which represents an increase of 3%. I get it. However, this increase was despite visitor numbers dropping by nearly 2%, and the income increase is a reflection of the fact that admission prices in the year increased. So I have drawn some conclusions, and I'm going to get at least a mark for that, maybe even two. But I haven't just said income went up or income went down. I've given some reason. I've also then followed through for definitely another mark, is that it's concerning that visitor numbers have fallen, as visitor income is a major contribution to, again, spelling mistakes don't get penalised, overall income representing approximately 15% of total income. And the fall in numbers could have a knock-on effect to other income sources, such as income generated from the shop and the cafe. So again, I think that's worth at least a mark, that I've really drawn some conclusion that if visitor numbers go down, that's less people in the park, less people spending money either in the gift shop or in the cafe. Hopefully you're picking up how I have not just given the result, I've tried to visualize as well. I'm thinking, this is a safari park. I've been to one as a kid. What do? I maybe buy a toy lion or something, or I get a burger in the shop. Yep, that kind of thing. I get a key ring. I get some stickers. So then we look at income from wildlife park, shop and cafe. And if we were to look at that in the spreadsheet, we can see that this income wasn't split, but it went up 15%, which is great despite numbers going down. and we want to draw some conclusions from that. So we say, you know, that's a good result. So we've actually decided that 15% increase is a good result, and demonstrated that in the year, the shop and cafe were able to offer customer services that were either more attractive and profitable than the year before. Maybe there's a better product mix, better promotions, and maybe more efficient operations as well that was enabling people to spend more money. Yeah, maybe they opened longer or opened earlier, I don't know. But there's definitely a big increase in income, and that's something to comment on. I then talked about membership fees, and they said, well, individual membership fees went up slightly, although if you think about it, less people visited the park, so there were less people to convert into individual members. So actually that wasn't bad. Numbers down, membership conversion up. So yeah, again, I made some good connectivity and conclusion there. But there was a huge rise in corporate membership income of 133%. But I also state, yeah, it's gone up a lot, but this income source is still quite low. And if you think about, you know, things like, national museums and things, they often attract a lot of corporate sponsorship to sponsor an event or an exhibit. So why doesn't BCO encourage people to sponsorship an animal, sponsor a panda or an elephant, or other similar marketing initiatives in which corporations will be able to improve their corporate brand awareness by association with BCO. So again, I think that second point on its own is definitely worth 2 marks, because I've really given some insights to how things can improve. And I think this one's probably worth a couple of marks as well, because yes, it was encouraging, but it was even more encouraging because the numbers went down. So you can see I'm scoring quite well just on membership fees because I'm following through with my points. If we talk about education program income, I showed that from the spreadsheet that this actually fell 6.1%. So we carry that through and we say, yes, it fell 6.6%. This could be explained by the number of training courses falling by 4%. So again, evaluation and professional skills marks are being earned there by making that connectivity. And it's concerning, as we actually do have a corporate objective, a strategic objective of increasing education. Again, no mark deducted for spelling mistakes. I'm making a few, but you're likely to, as long as it's, but when we check, we pick them up. Again, I've misspelled objective here, but doesn't matter. So yeah, further investigation into this fall should be made because it is part of our strategic objectives. Again, I then made a comment on donation, grant and legacy income, which was a 16% down on the year. And I then followed on saying this is particularly concerning because it represents 1/3 of our total income. Yep, and we need to investigate the reasons and maybe step up marketing activity there. So that was a bit of a worry. What else do we have? Overall, though, income has gone up despite our major contributor of income falling significantly in donations, grants and legacy. So we actually haven't done too badly, and that's something we should congratulate ourselves for. Obviously, the flip side of income is how much we spend. So then I went to talk about where expenditure was done, and if you look at the figures, we are given figures for the wildlife park and we're given figures for in the field. So to maximize my mark earning potential, I didn't combine these things as just charitable activities. I actually broke them into separate little pieces and tried to draw some conclusions for each piece so I could maximize my mark. So let's have a look what I said about the wildlife park. On the wildlife park, we talked about how this expenditure went up 9%. We need to investigate why it went up so much. And I'm then trying to hypothesize or speculate why it went up. We need to investigate were there any particular issues that had to be dealt with that year. For example, was there a disease broke out that cost a lot in vet fees? Was there high inflation? Were we less efficient? I don't know, but let the marker know that this is how your brain's working, and then the marker can give you credit for your suggestions. In the same way, animal support in the field, well, you might recall from reading the case that the activity was taking place, I think, in 100 countries. So has this figure rose 6.6% for a reason, or because there is a lot of overseas exposure? Has this increase taken place because exchange rate fluctuations? I don't know. Or maybe inflation in some countries. I don't know. But it's good to demonstrate your alert to such things. And then looking at costs of commercial operations, these have actually gone down. So this particularly was the shop and the cafe. And it would seem that the shop and the cafe seem to be better managed. And, you know, I've used there a little example at the end. It's not clear that there's anything to do with the sale of an inefficient property in the year. So again, good professional skills marks. You have clocked, if you just have a look at this, there was in the accounts a sale of a property. Was this an inefficient property that incurred a lot of commercial cost? I don't know, but I'm trying to draw a reason maybe for a reduction in costs. Or so there's a good point, a good recognition, but is it also maybe the result of the fact that we changed our pricing approach to maximize margin, and maybe we offered something, you know, customers didn't think it was more expensive, but we're clever in our pricing, e.g. a meal deal in the cafe. You know, just show the marker that you're thinking a certain way. So that's an excellent way, follow through with an example of how to get the extra +1 mark. We then look at non-financial performance, and the first thing we look at is staff mix, and we can show that, or we can see from our calculations, that the number of paid staff did reduce by 2%, but volunteer staff went up by nearly 17%. Now, this might be good, but it depends where these staff are being applied. If they're non-skilled areas, that's great. We can get people to do it for free, but we just need to be cautious that this isn't part of a trend of cutting full-time, replacing with volunteers, because some of those full-time staff will be expert vets and expert animal carers, and we need them to make the park efficient. Volunteers wouldn't have that level of expertise. Visitor numbers fell by 2%. This is disappointing. Why did they fall? Was it the result of less effective marketing? Let's investigate the effectiveness of current marketing. And is there any particular group that dropped? Well, I just thought when I was a kid at school, I used to go on a school trip to the local wildlife park. So I just threw that in. You know, which particular customer groups have dropped and why have they dropped? And I didn't clump together visitor numbers and visitor contribution because I wanted to maximize my potential scoring, and therefore I did a separate heading for visitor contribution, and I stated that despite customer numbers falling, the people who actually visit the park spend much more per customer than in previous years, and we need to investigate where the income increased to try and replicate that behavior in other areas. So another great thing that we identified. It mentioned training days. Can I say anything about training days? Well, I can, because I can connect them to the corporate objectives. And the number of training days fell by nearly 6%, which is concerning. Let me spell concerning right. Because our corporate objectives state a commitment. God, my spelling really was going bad here. A commitment to increase education and training. This is something we need to investigate. That's one word, isn't it? Something we need to investigate so as to ensure we achieve our corporate objectives. So obviously, you know, we've stated in our corporate objectives we're going to increase training days, and yet they're falling. It's a KPI of the business that needs to be looked at. In the same way, the number of animals being reintroduced into their habitat back to the wild, that fell by 5%, which again is really concerning. As a key strategic objective, of the business was to do this, and you could argue that that's the very reason for the existence of the charity, yet this particular aspect is falling, so it needs to be investigated. So again, what did I do, and what would I encourage you to do? I thought about what I was going to say. I could have said more, but I didn't really have time. I didn't talk about total expenditure because I had other more pertinent points to make. I left white space. I used a bold heading for each separate point where I wanted to encourage the marker to see separate points. Again, under income from wildlife park, I split it with white space to kind of say to the marker, here you go, give me a mark, and give me a mark for this, the significance of the point, and here's a space, and I'm going to give you another point with another so what at the end for another 2 marks potentially. So just take notice of what I've done there, because as the examiner report says very clearly, there's lots of students who calculate all the numbers, and I actually calculated all those numbers using the spreadsheet functionality in literally a minute, but we showed that to do a question which in this case had 13 marks, and that equated to 33 minutes, obviously 1 mark, 1 minute, or 1 minute's worth of calculations is not going to get you any marks. But it's the conclusions that you draw, the consequence of what's said. Is it positive? Is it negative? Is it concerning? And that is the main message that was really brought home from the examiner report if you have a look at it on 1B. And, please remember that if you're just stating a number's increased or decreased without any further discussion, you're not going to get any marks. Yep, you must interpret the calculations. Okay. And also, think about the context of things. I did question the fact, if you thought it was great that we're getting lots of volunteers, well, it is, but it's not great if we're getting volunteer vets or volunteer, animal behaviorists. That's not something we're likely to find amongst a volunteering population, and we would need to employ specifically trained experts in those fields. So we just have to work that. But to score the higher end of professional skills marks, you would have been bringing in some reference to what's been going on, for example, such as the sale of that building, such as better contribution per visitor. So well done. Hopefully that is helpful. Okay, hope we found that helpful. I have been looking at your questions, which you've been submitting, so thank you very much for taking the effort. I think Lucy is going to ask me some of the more pertinent questions which have been repeated, and we'll try and answer them.
Indeed, and we've got about 20 minutes for questions, so we've got a decent amount of time there. And let's just get stuck in straight away, I think. So I'd like to start with a fairly general question, but one that we get asked an awful lot about all our exams, and I'm sure that there are a number of students in this position. So this student has failed SBL a couple of times, and both times was almost there, so in the high 40s. Sean, what advice would you have for those students who have failed before and so are retaking, but more particularly have failed marginally? What would you suggest that they do in terms of where they focus their preparation this time round?
Well, people often say to me, oh, I just failed by 3 marks and I was very, very close. And if I'm really honest, that candidate's script would have had a lot of the examining team looking at it to try to see whether that student can be passed. And quite simply, candidates who come up with scores at that kind of level have simply not written enough in the exam. And the reason that they haven't written enough in the exam is invariably because their time management has been poor. So they've actually got 47 out of 70, which is actually quite a good score out of 70. But because they didn't use time management, they didn't appropriately allocate their time to each of questions. So they didn't answer 100% of the exam. And therefore, it's quite difficult to get 47 out of 70. It's much easier to get 50 out of 100. And that's to do with time management. The other thing that could have contributed to that would be that they didn't break the question down like I've suggested, and they didn't think about each of the parts. So they might have spent all their answer just answering half of the question. So again, they wouldn't be able to score more than 50% on that particular section. So, you know, having been involved with this for many, many years, I can almost guarantee that is the reason. You might be sometimes really unlucky and you completely misread the question, but that's not unlucky. That's poor management of reading and breaking down the question. So you haven't just missed out. You've normally done a really good answer to only 70% of the paper. So the takeaway: time management, mark focus. That's why. And how can I improve? I go on to the ACCA CBE platform and I practice answers to time on there, because that's what the exam is.
Perfect. Thank you, Sean. Another general question, just to get us started. I love this question. So what are the 5 things the SBL marker would hate to see in an answer script? I know that's going to overlap slightly with the advice that you've just given, and I wouldn't want you to list out 5 things, but what would you say are the the top couple of no-nos, you know, things really not to do in your answer script, whether it's something related to how you present or that kind of thing?
Well, markers want you to pass, and I think markers will get upset on your behalf when there's a question for which 4 marks are awarded and you've spent 4 pages writing an answer to. So you did really well, but you got all 4 marks after the first half page, and then you spent another 3.5 pages writing an answer, which is great, but you maxed out. You got 4 marks and you can't get any more. But the danger of spending that extra 3.5 pages is it takes time away from answering other questions. So that's tragic. The other thing, and this came through in a few of the questions, would be, you know, is it okay to write bullet points? Well, not really. The markers are not paid to infer what you mean. You need to explain to the marker what you mean and the consequences of what you're saying from your points. They're not going to work it out. So if you just give bullet points, I can obviously tell, I think you know what you're talking about, but the marker is not paid to infer. The marker is paid to mark what you give. So make sure you give a properly articulated explanatory sentence. You know, and so, yeah, that would be a tip there. So mark focus, tragedy of misreading a question or missing the rule of and out. So the question is often saying, can you do this and the disadvantages, and people just look at advantages. So the maximum they can ever get is about half marks, which again is tragic. Yeah, they would be 3 very common errors which are potentially going to happen in the exam, because, you know, if we're a normal person, we're going to be a little bit stressed. When we're stressed, we produce cortisol, and sometimes that messes with our brain a little bit. So we need to have mechanisms to calm ourselves down. So I would say read it once, read it twice, do your plan, and then just before you jump in, read it a 3rd time. If you do that, it's pretty hard to misread a question, but some people read it once and then dive in and tragically suffer the consequences.
Okay,
so there's
brilliant.
4. I don't think I could come up with 5, but there's 4 off the top of my head.
No, that's great. Thank you, Sean. Moving on. This is a question that we get asked an awful lot in relation to SBL. So the use of models in SBL. Should students be naming the models when they use them? Is that important? Could you just say a little bit about models in SBL?
Great question.
What, you know, what you get marks for,
so that's a great question. I think if you look at the rationale of what the SBL exam is all about, the SBL exam is an applied exam to represent the behavior in the workplace. Okay, so you'll imagine you're in the workplace and you're explaining something, and you say to your team in the workplace, according to Michael Porter's 5 forces, everyone's going to say, excuse me, you're going to have to bring me up to speed here. Michael Porter, I've not met him. Which department does he work in? You just wouldn't say that. You just wouldn't mention a model. It's an applied exam. On earlier applied skills, you do get marks for regurgitation of technical knowledge and demonstration that you know that knowledge, but the whole exam is linked to a taxonomy that it has to adhere to, and it's a level 3 Bloom's taxonomy, which is about synthesizing information. It's about applying and taking from all the knowledge presented conclusions. So there is no marks at all for mentioning models. There's no negative marking in SBL. But if you're mentioning lots of models and coming up with definitions to try and show, look, I've learned definitions, that would actually look unprofessional. So it would professional skills marks. So in answering your question, no, you don't use any models, but or you don't reveal your models. I would say models, think of them as the secret tools of a strategy consultant. So when you see someone writing a nice business article, I can tell, knowing many models, that they've got a framework of a model behind the structure of their argument, but they never reveal their model. And that's what you need to do in answering your exam questions. So the models are a great catalyst to arrange your thoughts, and you can use that in a brainstorm and your plan. But in your actual answer, you don't reveal them. It's not a test of do you know the model, because an experienced business person could often come up with answers to many of the tasks without any model, but the model makes it easier. So I definitely recommend be aware of the models and how they work and how they can help, but you don't reveal them.
Okay, perfect, thank you. What I'd like to just touch on now is around a specific point in your video, actually. So we had quite a few questions through asking about the way in which the right format for presenting an answer at a particular point in the video. I think maybe the task had asked for briefing notes and you haven't got quite that far. Now, obviously the purpose of your video was not to show necessarily what the absolute finished answer would look like, but how important is it in SBL to look out for the format that's being required in the task for how you present your answer and stick to that? And have you got any tips, for example, how should you lay out a briefing note?
Yep. Well, if I didn't say briefing notes there, that would be considered unprofessional. But I had a few questions asking, what's the format for a briefing note compared to the format for a memo? Well, there isn't a kind of an exam in memorandum structure or report structure. And if I worked for the government and wrote a report, it would probably be different than if I worked for the ACCA and did a report. But I think the point would be, you know, what would be a professional report looking like? And I would really, you know, be aware by maybe having a look at some answers that the ACCA give. But it's not about learning a pro forma. It's about acknowledging a request. So it just, you know, if Lucy asked me for a cup of tea and I gave you, I don't know, a glass of water, it would be, you know, it's not what you asked. So I think briefing notes definitely. I think acknowledge the request. So you know, I personally wouldn't really see a great deal of difference between a memo or a briefing note. I would title it briefing note to from date. I would acknowledge the request. I think that would be the most important thing. To completely ignore, that's not good. A report maybe has a bit more. It might have a brief intro, but again, there's not normally, there's sometimes, you know, a couple of marks given for conclusions if it's a report, but because reports normally have conclusions, and that's pretty normal in the workplace. But I think I would try to get away from learning pro formas. You need to have a feel and an understanding about what would typically be acceptable and acknowledge the request. So, you know, be professional. I had a couple of questions saying, oh, can I use K shouldn't you say thousands? Well, I would throw that back and say, if you put 500K in your workplace, would nobody know what you're talking about? Or would they understand 500K to mean 500,000? I'll leave you to draw the conclusion on that. But as accountants, I'm sure you use K all the time, and it would be perfectly acceptable business language.
Excellent. Thank you, Sean. Now, another question that I think you kind of covered this consistently throughout your video. Nevertheless, we've had lots of questions about it. We always do from students. So one student asking, what kind of number of words would be needed to make a point. Somebody else asking, is it 2 marks for 1 point? So is there any kind of final pieces of guidance you can give about what earns a mark or what earns 2 marks in SBL?
Well, maybe people were busy writing questions when I was explaining this. I mean, we did talk about it many times, and the general, and if you read examiners' reports, they will explain this similarly to the way I do. And what I'd say is, if you pick from the task a good, pertinent, explained point that's relevant to what's being asked, and also probably it helps if you structure it with the professional skills mark in mind, you'll get 1 mark. If you then follow on from that point and follow through with the consequence of what you've said, the so what, the implication, to draw another inferred point that might be connected to other things in the scenario, there's potential then to get 2. But I wouldn't be thinking, so some people say to me, they show me an answer and they've done 6 sentences, and I say, okay, you're pushing it a bit close there, there's 12 marks. It's you've given me 6 sentences. Even if each of those sentences were worth a mark, you're on 50%, and that's a bit risky. There's no follow through, and one of those points might not be good. So potentially you're going to get 4 or 5 out of 12, which is a fail. So I personally would just to help you, if you can write a sentence like I've suggested, and then you can write another sentence with the so what, the why, the consequence, then there's 2, and I might even leave some white space between those to make a clear distinction of my points. And if you can do that, well, hopefully you can get 2 marks. But the 2 marks is not given for a point. A lot of people seem to, well, my teacher told me I get 2 marks a point. No, you don't. You only get a mark if you do a well-developed point in the context of the task as it's asked. Do you understand that, Lucy, how I've explained that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that anybody that's feeling unsure about that, I would really encourage you to watch the video again. So this is available on demand once the session's finished. So go in and watch it again, even twice if you want to just make sure that you're getting that advice fully. Right, let's have a look at some other questions. Okay, here, a student asking if there are some calculations and they get those wrong, but then they are able to effectively discuss the impact of those numbers, would they get some marks for that discussion? Most definitely.
They could get virtually all the marks if their conclusions were of the right length and of the right mark focus. There's something that markers apply called the own figure rule, and I think this applies on other papers as well, whereas if you've just made a little mistake, but everything you say is based on sound logic from the mistake that you've made, then that's absolutely fine. You get penalty, well, you don't get any mark for calculating the figure, but there might only be 1 mark max for that. So, another tip, if you really are struggling with a calculation, make one up and then talk about your conclusions as potential you can score marks by doing it that way. I wouldn't say that's good practice, but if you're really struggling, I'm not going to let 10 marks go free because my calculation doesn't work. There won't be many marks for the calculation. Most of the marks will be coming from what the consequence of your answer that you got from calc shows. Okay, thank you, Sean. Another good question, and again, one that we hear quite a lot, not only about SBL. So this student has been doing question practice. They are aware through that practice of what the published answers for SBL exams look like. And I think they're overwhelmed by maybe the length of those answers and so on. So have you got any advice around for students who might be panicking about that? Yeah, I mean, what I'd say is read the exam paper. Yep. So if you read the exam paper, it's very clear. And the ACCA say the answers given here are not those of a standard which we would expect from students in the exam, but they also have a tutorial purpose. So, if you read the answers carefully in the small print, it says exactly that. If you were to try to write those answers out, you couldn't do it in the time. I'd also say when I look at the answers, as through the mind of a marker, they often don't have equal balance. They sometimes there's big fat paragraphs, there's thin ones. As you saw in my answers, I gave fairly balanced full articulated sentences relating to the point. I left white space between them. I made it very easy for the marker to navigate. Where possible, I would use subheadings, and the answers I gave would be, reasonable expectations of a reasonable student in the exam. The answers that you get in the real exam, as you know, in the answer section that you're given, are not meant to represent student answers. They're meant to represent an answer that can have some tutorial purpose for students who are maybe not yet having taken the exam. So, my answers as I gave them when they were subheaded and stuff would be, as I explained, that would be worth a mark, and then you might get a mark for this. But the answers given, official answers, are not what would be expected of a student. They're much bigger, but that's very clear. The ACCA make that really clear, and I don't understand why people think they're the answers when it clearly says these answers are not what is expected of a student in the exam. Small print would be my advice there.
Okay, so I hope that for anyone who was worried about that, that's reassured you. I think we've got time for just a couple more questions. So actually, this is one I'd like to address, and I'm happy to answer it, Sean. So this student is asking how they can effectively manage their screen, so manage the exhibits, the response area, the requirements, all the different windows that you need to have open on your screen. We have a fantastic set of videos, a set of 4 videos. We have one for each of the strategic professional exams. So a set of 4 videos for SBL, which if you watched all 4 back-to-back would take you no longer than about 15-20 minutes. You can access them via the resource finder in the students section. I think it's under the tab called CBE preparation, and it takes you through a really sort of step-by-step methodical approach to understanding how to kind of organise things, how to approach the exam. Would you add anything to that, Sean?
Well, I think it's absolutely excellent. I mean, what I'd say, I would use the analogy, when learning to drive a car, I'm not sure how to check my mirror and look through the windscreen, or I'm not sure how to change gear and do the indicator. Well, okay, that's fair enough. You've never done it before. The only way you're going to know is get in the car and drive. And the ACCA make it very easy for you to get onto the CBE platform, to practice, to download questions, to move exhibits around. You've just got to play with it. It's all there for you to do. If you're entering an exam without having been on a CBE platform and messed around, well, you're going to be wasting a lot of time in the exam, which you don't have to. So the ACCA have put it on a plate for you. You've got to take what's there. It's brilliantly explained. It's brilliantly arranged and organized. It is as it is in the real exam. The thing I say to students is, would you learn to drive by practicing on a bicycle, or would you learn to drive by practicing in a car? Yeah. So I'm not going to learn to do my ACCA CBE exam by learning on Word or Excel. I'm doing it on the ACCA CBE platform. It's really important, and it's all there for you. You just need to log on and play and use all those great videos Lucy has suggested.
Thank you, Sean. I think we've got time for one final question before I sum up. And it would just be to ask you for your final pieces of advice, basically, for students, how best to use their time between now and the exam. I think you've gone part way to answering that with everything you just said about the importance of engaging with the practice platform if you're doing a CBE. Any final thoughts from you there?
Well, if you go on to the student accountant, Lucy and I put some articles together a few months ago that are still there, and how to get your mindset in the right place, how to get your day organized correctly, and they're pretty comprehensive. I think there's 6 articles there you can read. I would be using the ACCA have a study planner which can help you organize your day. It's all about being efficient for the next 3 weeks. You can't study all the time, and I would encourage you to build into your next 3 weeks time for sleep, time for play, time for work, and time for a bit of study. But if it's done in a structured way, you will achieve all those things and be effective in all of them. So read the articles that I've written on the ACCA Student Accountant, and we spent a bit of time putting those together. And they're there for you to read and to act on. So that would be my advice. And, don't neglect the CBE platform.
Excellent. Thank you, Sean. Okay, that brings us to the end of the session. Before we go, I just want to remind everybody about the resources section that we have in the webinar platform, and in there you'll find a link to the exam that Sean was using in his video, a link to the examiner report as well, a fantastic article on how to manage your time effectively in strategic professional exams, a link to using the practice platform for SBL question practice. And again, you know, we can't emphasize enough how crucial that is if you're sitting a CBE. We've also uploaded a PDF of Sean's answer to task 1A that he tackled. We had a technical issue with his answer to the other part of the question. So if you do want to review that, then please do watch this on demand, and you'll be getting an email tomorrow with details of how to do that again. And then finally, very recently, Sean also produced a fantastic video for us, giving you advice on how to debrief your own answers during question practice. And that's something you might want to have a look at in these last couple of weeks. I circulated that to everybody via the Q&A facility. If you haven't seen that for some reason, then go onto YouTube and search on SBL marking debriefing, and that should come up for you. So that just leaves me to thank Sean. Thank you ever so much for this session, Sean. I think it's been hugely valuable. And thank you, importantly, to everybody who is on the line listening to, today, and wishing you the very best of luck with your upcoming exam. Thanks a lot, everyone, and goodbye.
Thanks, everyone.